doing? What are you doing out here, traveler? Yes, come in, quickly. Come, take a seat at the fire. What are you doing so high up on this mountaintop, in the middle of a storm, no less? Are you looking for someone? Who could you be? But no. By your garb, I would guess you're a adventurer of some kind. A pathfinder, you say? Well, you're awfully far from the Lodge of Absalom. Tell me, who is it that you would seek, trekking through such dangers? A master of games, and lord of the rules, you say? Handsome, you say? Well, there's only one legend that I know of that matches that description, but he has been gone for ages. Do you think you really have the power to bring him back? I might know a way. Let me find my code. Aha, here it is. I haven't used this in quite a while. Oh, me, I used to be a wizard, selling wares, but I have been absent from the world for some time as well. Here it is. If we recite this passage, there's the possibility he might return. But I warn you, do not take this step lightly. There is no telling what good or ills might befall us. Are you quite sure? Very well. Rise of the Rulelord uses trademarks and/or copyrights owned by Paizo Incorporated, used under Paizo's community use policy, paizo.com/community use. We are expressly prohibited from charging you to use or access this content. Rise of the Rulelord is not published, endorsed, or specifically approved by Paizo. For more information about Paizo Incorporated and Paizo products, visit paizo.com. I don't know if anything... Wait, do you hear that? Yes, I fear he is coming. The return. Nay, the rise of the Rulelord.
Welcome back to Rise of the Rulelord. It is me, your shifting and evolving Rulelord Pete. Do I sound different? I really hope so, because I'm trying out both a new microphone and a new manner of recording using XLR. That is but one of many changes that is coming to this podcast. For one, notably, the title has changed to Rise of the Rulelord, a Pathfinder 2nd Edition podcast. There's no real deep reason for the first change. It's just because I thought that dropping the S made the logo look a lot better, a lot cleaner, a lot easier to use in future graphic design things. Thank you very much, Gamepedia, for the suggestion. Secondly, the subtitle has changed. I have dropped education and am just saying I am a Pathfinder 2nd Edition podcast. This is the most major of the changes that I'm making, and I wanted to discuss why. Over this year, I have been pondering the future of being a content creator and, more importantly, my role in the space of Pathfinder 2nd Edition content creation. During a recent quote-unquote controversy about the presence of Pathfinder content creators, a thing that I noticed was that this podcast was not brought up pretty much at all. And it miffed me. Not because people didn't mention me, but because of the reasons why people wouldn't be mentioning me. A, I have had an extremely irregular upload schedule. The schedule being whenever I felt like it. And you can't do that. No matter whether you're a podcaster, a YouTuber, a TikToker, you have to post something consistently. Second, I wasn't even sure what kind of podcast I am anymore. My education podcasts are by far the best performing that I have, but they're also the hardest for me to continue doing. In my episode, What If I Could Ruin Paizo, I hinted that I was going to be doing class guides. I sat down about 5 separate times trying to record an episode about the human fighter. This would be going over the options of having the human ancestry with the fighter class going up to level 20. And I hated every single recording that I made of it. And I think I know the reason why. It's because I don't actually play Pathfinder. I mean, of course, every game master are in themselves a player, but I hardly ever have a character sheet in front of me, at least my own character sheet. My most recent foray was being a bard in a Gravelord campaigns run by a fantastic GM known as GM Weaver. Go look them up on Start Playing. They are incredible. And yes, I did have fun, but in trying to make the fighter episode, I just don't play enough to feel like I have an authoritative stance on how to educate people on either playing a human or a fighter. And that's because I am so often a GM and I love being a GM. So while I need to understand class concepts, it's hard for me to talk from the player perspective about what options people would find enjoyable. But that also comes from my own playstyle where I don't believe that there are bad options in Pathfinder. I think it all depends on the game that you're playing, how the GM is deciding to run it, and of course, what the player wants to accomplish out of it. On the occasions where I have been a player, I choose to do unconventional build types. I don't build for optimization, I build for a specific character design. So the bard that I played in Gravelords was a reflection of Geb, like the actual ruler Geb. And I wanted to choose options that reflected a kind of pompousness, a need to control, a very wordy person. And so like my signature spell was Biting Words. Is Biting Words the most powerful spell? No. Is it the most utilitarian as far as debuffing or skill increases? No. But it was fun for that character. So I don't think that I can be someone who says these are good options. I just think that they're all good options and you need to tailor your choices to match the playstyle of the game that you're playing in. Does that mean that I'm never going to talk about rules anymore? No, of course not. I have a lot of thoughts about rules, and there are a lot of rules that I think need to be explored further. But they are just going to be the general rules, and at some point, I'm going to run out of those. There's only so many times that I would be able to talk about different actions or different rules. And in the 3 years of recording this podcast, my first episode being released in June of 2021, I've discovered that I like just talking about Pathfinder. I went beyond education and did interviews with people. I did some silly stuff. I did some story stuff, and I like having that mix. And so I am choosing to embrace it. I am just going to be a Pathfinder 2nd edition podcast. I'm going to talk about what I want, how I want, when I want, and no one can stop me. I mentioned this only for people who have subscribed to the podcast previously, hoping that this podcast would just be a tutorial on Pathfinder 2nd edition. That was definitely my intent when I started, but it is not the direction that I am continuing to go in. So what does that mean for the main Rise of the Rulelord show? It means that it's just going to be a general podcast. Sometimes I am absolutely going to talk about a specific set of rules. Other times, I'm probably going to just discuss my thoughts on GM philosophy or game design. But I also wanted to have a few specialized shows for specialized topics. Rise of the Rulelords Unchained was originally supposed to be a bonus-only episode for Patreon, and then I decided I hated doing Patreon, so it just kind of became the interview podcast, and that's what it's going to continue to be, but it's only going to be streamed on my YouTube channel. And yes, I have a YouTube channel. I have really enjoyed making the Unchained episodes, but I really hate editing them. In fact, I have authentically had sleepless nights dreading going into an Unchained episode and editing it. It just, I don't know, it seems like a big thing. And it does take hours to do. I have tried tools, even AI ones, which I despised using and they never worked well. I've tried editors. They also tended to also use those same AI tools and it just sounded awful. But I don't feel good about releasing podcast episodes with a bunch of ums and uhs and empty spaces. Meanwhile, on YouTube, that doesn't seem to be an issue. At least not with recorded streams, which is why I think it will work a lot better on that platform rather than this one as far as generating regular content. I want to continue to talk to Paizoverse content creators, new and established authors making Pathfinder compatible products, designers, and even sometimes Paizo staff. I really enjoy these interviews and I want to keep them going. I just also don't want to feel this obligation to make them sound perfect, both out of respect for the creator and for the listener. This way, I'll also be able to put up pictures of the product because some of these things are truly beautiful, like the Wayfinder that's being made by Type 40. We talked about it, we went into great detail about what it looked like, but it would have been so much better if you could have seen it on camera. So Unchained episodes will no longer be podcast episodes, but they will be on YouTube. In addition, prior episodes of the podcast are going to be uploaded to YouTube. There's already kind of a YouTube feed since they got rid of Google Podcasts, but I'm going to be uploading much better designed ones that have the words on screen for people who like to follow along visually or just prefer having a YouTube video on in the background while they do whatever it is that they like to do. As I get more into streaming, maybe I will also get more comfortable making short form content on YouTube as well. I don't know, we'll see. It depends on what niche is still available because there's a lot of people doing a lot of great stuff in the Paizoverse already, and I don't know how I want to add my voice to that particular space beyond the interviews. Secondly, I am continuing review of the Rulelords, but I'm going to be doing those a little bit differently as well. In the past, I had been using them to go over third-party products with co-host Beth Perrin and giving them the same Paizo treatment as any other Paizo class. There are so many great third-party options out there, and I think that they deserve a fair shot. If I continue the format that I'm currently doing, those will also be streamed only. Hopefully, again, with Beth Perrin's participation because she is so fun. But on the podcast side, I want to start reviewing more Paizo products. Now, I will never be the kind of person who, when a new book drops or new Paizo blog goes up, I'm going to have an opinion ready in 30 seconds with a super in-depth look at stuff. I don't know how other content creators do it, but I get it. It's part of the game. I, however, like to have spent some time with the content, interacting with it, before I give any kind of judgment about it. So I probably still won't qualify for Paizo review products. That would be cool to get free books, but I think that these reviews are going to be much more in-depth and much more honest about how you're going to interact with these pieces of content. Especially as a consummate game master, I have run most Paizo adventure paths at some juncture. I've only finished one, Fist of the Ruby Phoenix, but I'm getting very close to finishing Abomination Vaults. However, I've also run Gatewalkers, Quest for the Frozen Flame, Age of Ashes, Extinction Curse, 7 Dooms for Sandpoint. I was a player in Gravelords, as I just said. And even though I might not ever get to run any of the rest of them, at least not in any kind of timely fashion, I have enough experience, I think, with the adventure paths that I am able to talk about their general design, the individual mechanics, the plot points, the characters. I think that all of the adventure paths are great, but not all of them are 5 out of 5 stars. Plus, I really want to talk about Howl of the Wild soon as I finish up the book. I am a very slow reader. But once I get that done, as well as some other books, I'm going to try to talk about those a little bit more as well. Finally, one of the biggest changes, and the one that I am personally looking the most forward to, is Tales from the Rulelord. Paizo has tweaked their community use policy so that now things that are released on the Paizo blog are able to be used in content, specifically clarifying that you can use any of the text or artwork published in the Paizo blog or web fiction. I recorded the first chapter of the God's Reign prophecies, and honestly, that was one of the most fun things that I've done on this podcast in a very long time. Which isn't to say that I didn't have fun talking with people or coming up with specific contents, but I really liked coming up with the voices, finding the right sound effect, adding music, because those kind of radio dramas are a big part of my childhood. I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and there is a very prominent fundamentalist religious organization that I'm not going to talk about. They deserve every bad thing that comes their way, but if there's one thing that they were good at, it was audio dramas. They had one for kids that they made that they always incorporated Bible stories with, but some were just genuinely fun. They also made recordings of other books like Sherlock Holmes, and one that is really beloved to me was The Chronicles of Narnia. The sound production that went into those things was phenomenal and really brought those books to life for me as someone who, again, has trouble reading. And now we're lucky enough to live in an age where these audio dramas are made in podcast form. The Magnus Archives, Phenomena, and one of my personal favorites, Omen Podcast, which was a Pathfinder specific one that has sadly seemed to have gone defunct, are incredible. Though I would never be able to bring in full casts to do these things, so I'm going to make my college try at doing voiceover work and also adding all of those other elements that make these stories come to life for the various bits of Paizo web fiction that they've already published. Now, there's a lot that I'm not going to be able to touch because they already made them with Audible. Those versions are great. You should totally go listen to those. But there's a lot that have not been produced professionally. The God's Reign prophecies being one, but also the Zoetrope logs, the Windsong Testaments, Tianza Days, Iconic Encounters, Tales of Lost Omens. These are all on the table now, and I want to bring them to life both for people who also have a reading challenge like I do, as well as people who just want to listen to a good story. Even though those also take work, most of the work comes from the sound design section of trying to find good music, good sound effects, making sure that the pacing is right. But I had a lot of fun with that specific part. So I think that that is also going to help make a more consistent release schedule for the podcast. Finally, something that I'm doing outside of the podcast is I am dipping my toes into writing. Now, I have already done some game design stuff, notably for Eldritch Osiris Games in Monstrous Beast, but also stuff in Naltoth Candlehurst and The Gardener's Guide to Gaming. But those were only contributions for both of the latter two. I had to pay the extra amount to be able to insert things, but I still had fun doing the creature design of the stuff that shows up in there. This project, though, is going to be writing an entire adventure path that I am calling Journey to the Painted Caldera. Like most of the early Paizo adventure paths, this is based off of a one-shot that I made with my friends that I am turning into a 3-chapter adventure. The premise is that the characters find themselves trying to stop a ring of poachers. These poachers are collecting dinosaur skin, but not just any dinosaur skin, but almost tie-dye dinosaur skin. These rare dinos exist in a lost world known as the Painted Caldera, a dead volcano that houses a special tree with special fruits that, when eaten in large enough quantities, start to change the complexion of one's skin to be colorful. It's going to be a 4 through 7 largely exploration-based adventure, but it's also going to have new character options, such as 2 new ancestries, the wild ones, which are based off of Sasquatch and Yeti, and the Sauriska, a dinosaur-based ancestry, which has a lot in common with this concept made in the early 90s about a proto-human dinosaur. I'm also going to be including a passion project of mine with expanded Shuni heritages, making it so that they are no longer exclusively pug people. There will also be options for dinosaur mounts, companions, as well as new archetypes and creatures. That is a lot, and I am definitely going to have to crowdfund a little bit for it. But the biggest expense isn't my own time writing things, it is the cost of the artwork to make the book look good. I've already paid some artists out of my own pocket to come up with some great initial artwork for the project, but this is the one time where I could really use your help with the initial funding. That's why I have set up a Ko-Fi, or coffee. I don't know how the kids these days are saying it. That link is in the show notes, but it has a very set goal to help offset the cost for these initial pieces of artwork. If you have ever liked what I do, whether it is with this podcast, with Beginner Box Days, the subreddit stuff that I do, if you ever wondered about supporting me on a Patreon, this is the time and this is the way to do it. This is a big dream of mine that I've had since PaizoCon 2022. And with the release of Howl of the Wild, I think it is finally the time to get it out there, especially now that I know what Paizo has made so that I don't have to overlap with any of it. So if you can, please go to ko-fi.com/Rulelord2e, contribute to this goal. It would be such a huge help, and I promise that I will find a way to make it worth your while. But those are the big changes coming to this podcast. I hope that these things are exciting you as much as they are me. They should finally be a way for me to create sustainable content, and I hope that you'll stick around. And if this wasn't what you're looking for, well, I'm glad that you listened for as long as you did. So to christen Tales from the Rulelord, and in honor of Pride Month, I wanted to do one of these Pathfinder tales for you, making this the official end of the update portion of this podcast episode. So to leave you off, I hope that you'll remain subscribed. Go check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Rulelord2e, as well as the Ko-Fi. And if you want to find more ways to listen, as well as ways to interact with the podcast, go to rulelord2e.com, where you can find links to my Blue Sky, ways to submit a community use policy voiceover, which I'll play at the start of new episodes, and anything else that is new and exciting on the horizons for Rise of the Rulelord. And until that next session, don't let the rules rule you. Oh, and real quick, Andrew White, Paizo's digital products lead, messaged me after the How to Ruin Paizo episode with a real quick correction. Paizo is actually directly involved in production of the majority of Pathfinder 2e content on Foundry VTT. The Foundry team has produced a lot of great licensed content, including the Beginner Box, Bestiary tokens, and Adventure Path compilations like Abomination Vaults and Kingmaker, but the monthly Adventure Path and organized play releases are all produced by Paizo. Though they don't develop them in-house, currently that work is contracted through Metamorphic Digital, a company that I didn't even know existed, but does a very good job. So thank you, Andrew, for the correction. Thank you to Metamorphic Digital for all of the wonderful work you do, and of course to all of the Paizo staff, because you are amazing and deserve all the good things all the time. And now, a reading of the iconic encounter of Wasps and Whispers by James Jacobs. Mariciel took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly as she tried to relax, her arms balanced, palms up, along the chair's slender armrests. It wasn't working. Her belly remained tight and crawling with gut wasps. The nervous feeling in the pit of your stomach that the Church of Callistria called the tingle you get for the trick is all set. But this was no complex prank or long-planned vengeance that had the wasp doing their thing. It was something, Mariciel forced herself to remember, that she'd brought entirely upon herself. Not that bringing nerve-wracking situations on herself was anything new either. There was that time she crawled headfirst into the narrow crevice at the base of that giant anvil altar after Harsk had mentioned how worshippers of Droskar supposedly stashed treasures under immense shrines. Or the time that Valeros had challenged her to a drinking contest on that long trip to Absalom. And who could forget Lem's face when she took him on with that dare to climb to a top of a Hell Knight castle's tower to swap out its flag for a set of ogre undergarments. And of course, there was that stunt she pulled when she'd first met that cute cleric up in Sandpoint, when Mauricio had thrown herself into the thick of a fight against a pair of ghouls in order to show off that there was more than one way to destroy undead uprisings. Thinking back on those antics did the trick, and Mauricio sighed in relief as the gut wasps settled down. After all, the cache of magic potions, scrolls, and talismans she'd recovered from the Under Anvil stash ended up saving the day not long thereafter when those smoke-bearded undead guardians had risen up against them, hadn't they? And never mind the fact that it was the pilfering of the temple treasury that got their attention in the first place. And good old Valeros still thought she'd won the drinking contest fair and square and bragged about her fortitude to anyone who'd listen. As far as Mauricio was concerned, some quick sleight of hand on the drinks was only playing to her strength anyway. It was only cheating if you got caught. And those insufferable Hell Knights had that heraldry redecoration coming. More to the point, everyone she told the story to agreed that ogre undergarments looked better on a Hell Knight flagpole than any dull old flag. And as for that ghoul slaying gambit, the fact that Mauricio knew those filthy old ghouls wouldn't be able to paralyze her didn't make the stunt any less risky. She'd managed to avoid any serious bites, but after finishing off the last of them with a dagger to the dome, she'd emerged completely covered with claw marks and a bit dizzy from blood loss. Of course, the dizziness only got worse when the cute cleric swooped in to catch her as she stumbled and began to heal up her wounds. Mauricio had been tempted to kiss her then and there, but those pesky gut wasps had gotten in the way. Still, she must have made an impression on Kira since that first kiss came not so long after. Better than the dragon's whole treasure hoard that moment, and just like that, all the work she'd done to banish her jitters went out the window. Just thinking of Kira had brought back the gut wasps. Mauricio couldn't help but wonder, was the woman she loved experiencing the same jitters herself, just one room over? She couldn't imagine it. Kira was always so calming, so stable, so confident. And for that matter, the Church of Serenray probably didn't call it gut wasps anyway. Maybe sun gut? Angel acne? Dawnflower jitters? The Healy heaves? The last notion brought a giggle to the elf's lips, and the nervousness of that titter startled her. She reached down to give her wheel ribbon a rub, but of course that didn't help. She'd given the yellow and black Callistrian ribbon over to the High Priestess for use in the ritual. Mauricio was out of the chair then, pacing the length of the room as she ran over her part in the ritual in her head. Here, surrounded on all sides by Serenite art and iconography, she couldn't help but feel inadequate. What place did an elf with no family, a thief and a smuggler, a part-time worshiper of the goddess of trickery, vengeance, and pleasure have in a place as beautiful as this? What place did she have at the side of one of the most kind-hearted and understanding people she'd ever met? Mauricio pushed those doubts aside, reminding herself that while she'd spent most of that night a week ago building up her courage to suggest she and Kira take part in a heartbound, Kira had surprised her by making the suggestion herself. This whole plan wasn't technically Mauricio's own, despite the months she'd taken researching the ritual and preparing for it. Kira had been the first to suggest it, after all. Mauricio's nervous thoughts kept returning to the what-ifs of the pending rite. She and Kira, as the focus of the magic, would only be secondary performers in the ritual, but that didn't mean their part in activating the magic wouldn't be important. She knew that Kira would be performing her part of the ritual using her knack at knowing the right thing to say, but Mauricio had to rely on her skill at knowing the ins and outs of society as a whole. As with any ritual, there was the potential for backlash, but the descriptions of the jitters and shakes and dulling of wits that struck those who failed to perform a heartbound properly didn't seem all that much worse than the gut wasp she was already dealing with. And of course, if all went according to plan, they'd have more than a cherished memory of the declaration of their love together. They would be connected on a level even deeper than before, able to sense each other's proximity, to share their thoughts and hopes, and would never feel alone. Mauricio had assumed Kira would want to seal the ritual with the traditional matched rings. In preparation, she'd actually purchased jewelry for the first time she could remember. plundered or stolen rings just seemed wrong in this case. Only for Kira to suggest using Callistrian wheel ribbons to symbolize the bond. Kira must have taken Mauriciel's shock for something other than speechless love, since she had hastened to add, "Since you pushed to have the ritual performed by my church, it made sense for there to be an element of yours involved." Or at least, that's how Mauriciel assumed the sentence would have ended if she hadn't stopped it with an impulsive kiss. A knock on the door brought her pacing feet and her racing thoughts to a standstill.
"The High Priestess is ready for you,"
came the acolyte's voice. "Okay," Mauriciel answered, blushing as she heard that nervous tremble in her own voice. She took a breath and stepped towards the door. She could already hear the music swelling. Could even hear Sione chiding Valeros to quiet down, here they come, from the far side of the door. The gut wasps were back, and worse than ever. And as Mauriciel opened the door, she marveled at how her hand, normally so steady, so precise, was shaking. And then, as she stood at the edge of the room, only vaguely aware of her friends gathered, mostly silently along the walls, she saw Kira framed in the opposite doorway. And a moment later, as Kira's lips moved, Mauriciel heard her beloved's voice whisper in her ear. If the ritual was truly successful, they'd both be able to speak to each other with their thoughts. But for the moment, Mauriciel knew that Kira had cast the cantrip herself. "Here we go, Miri. You look amazing. I hope I don't mess this up. I've got a raging case of gut wasps." With those words, Kira effortlessly soothed Mauriciel's nerves. And with her whispered reply, words meant for Kira alone, they strode into the room together.